lobby to the session. So stay with us, and it's good to see we have people from all over the world. So welcome to SAP Purpose Network Live. We are back on our series that actually have 3 weeks anniversary. We have now more than 3,000 people on the platform just in 3 weeks. And this session here, or this series here, is all around the world after COVID-19. And I do know that more and more people around the world are beginning to have that conversation more, because we are beginning to see opening. It's not just Denmark where I speak about that we are opening, but we are beginning to see that not just in Europe, but different places around the world. Even though we do know that there might again come COVID again up in autumn. But again, there are more optimism, and this is why it is fascinating to follow a series like this one that will be running for 4.5 months, which is really a history moment that we all are going to right now. So this session today is about the synthetic media revolution after COVID-19, and we have our amazing people with us. I'm just going to stop sharing here. With me, we have Charlotte Brabandt, who is a digital keynote speaker. She's a TEDx speaker, she's an author, and she's just an incredible person who will be the all moderator of the session. Then we have David Sean, who is the board member and CFO at Hanson Robotics. He is have the Angel Invest. He is at Harvard Business School grads. He is part of the HBS Alumni and Angels. He's also with us every single time he's part of the series. And then we have David Meltzer, who is the co-founder of Sports One, marketing, consultant, business coach, digital keynote speaker, author, amazing person also who is part of the series every single time. And then with us, we have a guest who is Arif Khan, who's the CEO, co-founder of Analytic AI. And with that, I will hand over the word to Charlotte. It is the 3rd session in the series. So much more to come, and for all the audiences, I can promise you it's going to be a great session. All yours, Charlotte.
Thank you so much, Anne, and I'm so glad Arif could also join. Hi, Arif. Welcome. So the advent of artificial intelligence has been truly, or can be compared to the invention of fire, I think. Yet, in the hands of a few, many are still unable to access its true potential, or even to understand the true deep impact it brings with it. And in today's episode, we will further explore the need to understand the foundation of AI and explore its applications and evolve our understanding. We can now move faces and voices in the same way that we can move bits of information. Deep learning is enabling the next revolution in content creation, allowing people to clone their likeness, such as voice, face, or characteristics, and create entirely new digital representations of themselves. So, synthetic AI media is enabling scalability, unprecedented levels of real-time interactivity, localization, and a new white spot space of engagement for brands and true influencers like yourselves. Yet, this begs several questions. What is the value of a face, or a recognizable voice, or a whole personality? Brands spend billions of dollars on celebrity endorsements, influencer marketing, and more to reach valuable customers. Highly realistic synthetic faces and voices can be instantly created and conveniently modified, or even cloned, or rented, or even sold. So how do we assign and apportion outside. We are all, I believe, at home, and looking at the circumstances which we are in. How can synthetic media serve the better angels of our nature as humans seek connection and creativity in this time of crisis? So I would like to welcome our guest keynote and a good friend, Arif Khan. He's a venture builder, investor, and product expert in the area of artificial intelligence. Arif is the founder and CEO of Alencia AI, and he will bring his unique foresight and perspective to us as he talks about the future of AI and media. He is on a mission to democratize AI tools and knowledge for the masses. Arif's prior executive leadership roles include managing the global blockchain-based AI marketplace at Singularity Net, and Arif was its CMO and founded its Global Accelerator program. Prior to that, Arif led strategy, product marketing at a SoftBank-backed startup called Grab. And in his early career, Arif witnessed the disruptive transformation that digital platforms brought, where he led growth and business development for LinkedIn in Asia, winning multiple awards. Arif is a featured writer for artificial intelligence on Medium.com, and his work has attained global coverage in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Forbes. He has gathered leading minds in machine learning and blockchain to democratize AI solutions for all. It's my great honor and pleasure to welcome Arif.
Thank you, Charlotte, for that energetic, vibrant, and vivacious introduction. I think I've never been introduced that way before, and I really appreciate your time and energy in livening up the spirit when all of us are sort of in lockdown and stuff. So I want to take this opportunity, and I see some familiar faces as well on the call, to just set the context for synthetic media. Most people look at synthetic media as something that would contribute disinformation. And from that perspective, people think anything that is AI generated as, or anything within that domain that is AI generated will likely contribute to more misinformation, disinformation in society, especially within the domain of news and media and outreach. Today, my hope is not to answer some of the questions that Charlotte has posed about what is the value of a face or voice, but to leave you with those questions, but more just to give some frameworks that are guiding my thinking and also some challenges that we are encountering along the way. So if it's okay, I'll just share my screen. I'll start off with a brief narrative or story that inspired the inquiry into synthetic media. So I think all of you can everyone see my screen? Yeah?
Yep.
Yeah? Okay. So this is a very interesting film. Everyone can see the moving slides and the imagery. It's a very interesting book written by Philip K. Dick, and it's called Man in the High Castle. Man in the High Castle starts off with the idea that what if, and Philip K. Dick, when he was writing this book, he had an idea, which is, what if the Axis powers had won World War II, right? Not the Allies. That means not the Americans, not the British. They did not win World War II. What happened is he creates this entire scene in America, which America is divided into the East Coast and the West Coast. And the East Coast of America is controlled by Nazi Germany and Berlin. So imagine New York with the Nazi imagery in the flag. And the West Coast of America is controlled by the Japanese Pacific states, so the Nippon Empire. And amidst all of this tyranny and dictatorial propaganda, there start to emerge some films. And these films start showing what actually happened in our reality, which is that the Allies won the war. These films are considered deep fakes. They are banned by the state. They are harmful propaganda films, and people look at them as material that if you possessed, you would be imprisoned. So I see this frame as a very important frame because today we are living in a world of absolute disinformation to the point point where it has saturated our understanding of the world. And I think there are many ways of thinking about this. The first frame that one can look at would be that we have disinformation occurring anyway in society at so many different levels and hierarchies. How do we actually deal with that level of disinformation? Do we, example today, do we just discount this type of information and just disregard it? I'll give you a quick example of type of propaganda that started way before, and it's fairly similar to the times of Nazi Germany. There were times when individuals, business owners, leaders who happened to be Jewish, their faces and voices were caricatured. Their faces were caricatured in situations and put onto different faces and got millions of people to view those pictures and images. And this is happening today, of course, but it's past our consciousness where we don't necessarily confront because everything is moving so quickly. We have so many challenges. And usually it is in these sort of situations that we are trapped or stuck in, because that's when regulation or the culture can shift just beneath our feet, that it becomes difficult. So this is, for example, a picture retweeted by the president of the US, which shows Mike Bloomberg, presidential candidate and successful entrepreneur, in an example where he's trying to make fun of him from a short standpoint. Now, in response, sometimes you have campaigns or individuals trying to use the same technologies. In this case, Mike, when he began running, he started looking at memes. AI-generated memes is a powerful way to combat this type of misinformation. So if you have so much noise, do you contribute to the noise, or do you try and create genuine signal? And if you have genuine signal, how do you actually create it? A lot of the content that is put out there by political parties today and that is retweeted, especially in the American context, is largely one-sided disinformation-based narratives. If you add synthetic media to the mix, you can create more disinformation quite easily, and that has already occurred. That means we have gone past that. But where is the hope in all of this, and how do we actually empower people to create the right narratives? For me, it is when we understand the core insight that we are getting to the point where people's faces and voices are becoming composable. So this is an interesting image of Jimmy Fallon, the news anchor, the late night show anchor, with John Oliver. And it's a one-to-one face swap, and it's done quite easily with open source software. Still a little bit complicated to do, but it's occurring in the entertainment and media domains. Of course, now these anchors don't have their shows because of the present pandemic and the coronavirus situation, but people are using these technologies to tell different stories, whether it's entertaining or not. I've seen some positive use cases. So one example of this, what we did was we were working with one of our customers where we wanted them to understand how can they create general awareness in the media about what they're doing. And what we did was we basically did a simple campaign where we swapped one of the faces of the owners of the businesses into a martial arts film. It's possible to do it if you have a rights-based infrastructure or a permission. Where this comes in from a media standpoint is that it's really important to enable these sort of technologies to allow people to be as creative as possible. So we're getting to the point where it will become extremely easy for anybody to swap faces and voices. We cannot stop that from occurring, but we can create the frames of culture and information and education to make sure that the right messages are structured and the narratives allowed to flourish. So the way I see the problem or the challenge is not so much can we stop somebody from taking your face and cutting it and regulate that away. That is impossible in the United States, in the context of the United States. It's impossible to stop that under the laws of caricature, free speech. Synthetic media has enabled a new class. What do we do with this new ability that we will have to just create synthetically generated faces and voices. My belief is in the human potential and human spirit to do tremendously creative things with it. Can you retain the culture of an entire family by preserving the voice of a grandfather so that one day great-grandkids not yet born can hear him read an audiobook not yet written, right? So that's one use case. Second, so you can save entire cultural narratives that get lost when they are passed down from generation. Can you also use this technology to enable people of, in my case at least, or in my understanding, people who don't often see themselves in positions of power. So one thing that Sheryl Sandberg did at Facebook was she insisted that stock images from now on also feature women leaders in positions of negotiation around the table. So in the previous stock images, and this is how powerful imagery is, in the previous stock images, you'd have mostly men around an executive corporate table, and those stock images were used in marketing and media branding. How can you use synthetic media to advance more humanistic agendas that might actually bring us together instead of divide us? So these are the questions that I'm interested in. Underneath all of this new revolution of swapping faces and voices, you'll uncover a new asset class. The asset class is going to be our face, our voice. How do we measure and value this? In today's context, we have celebrities doing the exact same thing. So you can, for example, a celebrity's face and voice is worth something. How we actually transfer that worth when they decide to transfer their faces and voices this way is going to be fascinatingly interesting. And it's the conversation that I'm interested in being a part of. So I'll just leave it there for questions. As you can tell, there are more questions that this technology imposes and enables than it actually answers. And that's true for any new technology. And I think we can probably transition to the conversation now. Thank you for giving me your attention and time.
Thank you so much, Arif, and thank you for sharing with us your vision on synthetic media. But before we go into the panel discussion, just a quick follow-up question out of curiosity. What is the most creative request you've had in synthetic media?
Yeah, I think one of the most creative requests, let me think, was I was in a conversation with a senior business leader, and I was trying to, of course, share with him how this technology can enable him to create a virtual influencer who can speak different languages. And he was actually really interested in how can he preserve his dad's voice and likeness so that can be passed down to his kids, because his dad was an amazing storyteller and philosopher, and he wanted to see how can we preserve that. So I told him I can preserve the face and the voice digitally, but the text is something that will take a little bit of time for interaction. So we can have a one-to-one conversation in terms of a scripted conversation, but we cannot yet have that sort of smooth, free-flowing conversation, although there are machine learning open source algorithms out there right now that you can train a corpus on, but whether you can sensibly get back yes or no answers, I think my friends from Hanson Robotics may be able to give us better examples of that, because Sophia can do that. So I think that was one of the most interesting requests, because that opened up a whole new space of cultural preservation. And there are projects, for example, right now, one of my friends in the Jewish community shared with me that because Holocaust survivors have been passing away, and there is, for example, an entire movement dedicated to Holocaust denial. Unfortunately, what you want to do is you want to preserve these stories of Holocaust survivors so that this is recorded and this is not whitewashed, and this is not taken away. How do you actually preserve these stories in a very powerful way? Synthetic media can actually do that. So I see really synthetic media as a tool kit to balance against sometimes propaganda, balance against different narratives, balance against extremely difficult situations and scenarios. So these are some of the more creative requests, the one I received here.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And what really touched me in your keynote, it gave me true goosebumps was just the thought of preserving the voice. And I think we are all programmable influencers in our field, inspiring our communities. I mean, that's what David Meltzer does on a daily basis, where I'm a big follower of his social media and speaking truth to power. AI creates human possibilities like digital copies. And AI, as we just learned in the keynote, it opens up opportunity to preserve a voice, for example, of your grandfather, to read a story to you that has not even been written in the future. Now, let's start with our first panel question. What, in your opinion, will the new normal be on social media in the future? How about Arif? You go.
Okay. I think the new normal is already there. It's being dictated. So this example is a little bit old. When I was going through the president's feed, and I encourage some of you to do that every now and then, not too regularly. There's another retweet or recently showing President Barack Obama's face swapped onto an ad. I don't know whether people have seen it, but it's a very interesting example of synthetic media being used. It's not necessarily a full deep fake or disinformation, but that's one example. I think the new normal is one where there is just tremendous noise and enhanced by synthetic media. I caution against any approach that says, let us cut the noise down, because the problem is, who is the one cutting the noise? And that means usually a regulator. That means you're introducing an aspect of censorship and filtering. And the second part is, how will they cut the noise and what do they define by noise? Sometimes rumors can be true in society. So, for example, if the noise happens to be music or signal 5 years down, and we cut that noise today, how do we actually adjust for this? So we live, thankfully, I think in the US, from a standpoint of freedom and preserving the ability for people to articulate themselves, and that freedom comes, of course, with many different consequences. The seduction will be for us to try and stop this completely, because synthetic media will create that level of disinformation. So there are certain laws that protect us, for example, the right to publicity, the right not to be defamed, so on and so forth. But within the context of social media, I see this as a conversation that's only going to be enhanced and improved a lot further. And sometimes the challenge will be that the new normal is something that we won't recognize. The new normal is the president retweeting a photo of somebody on someone else's face, right? And proposing and pushing synthetic media forward. I never thought that would happen, right? So that new normal continues to shift. We need to adjust. I would encourage us to use the same tools to become better storytellers ourselves.
Thank you, Arif. And David Meltzer, I'm curious to get your opinion. I mean, we just learned how we can preserve voices and play them to our grandchildren or children that aren't even born yet. But you, being on social media every day and me really watching you every day, being my highlight of the day, what is your opinion of the new normal and social media in the future?
I think it's one that we're working on right now, just verification. The speed in which we've developed this technology is unbelievable. In fact, the last book that I wrote, I used the same technology to it used to be you have to go back and record when you didn't pronounce a word, like didn't. I say didn't. And they would make me go back and re-record my voice. Now all I do is type in the actual words. They've already had the frequency of my voice. I type in the word and it pronounces it in my voice perfectly. So what has happened is it's really verification. We've been verifying things for years, signatures, documents. So there has to be a verification, not a regulation, but a verification. And I think going forward, we always have a new normal, but I think the change that will occur is there'll be much more verification in the data that we receive, whether it's visual or written data. And two, live will become much more important. The value of celebrity entertainers, executives going live will have much more value now, because as more and more copies and transformative personalities and memes are existing, the value of that's going to go down for big companies, endorsements, and branding, as well as in different case scenarios of even education. So I think now live, if you're not understanding it and practicing it, will be more and more important moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Very good point. And David Chen, what is your opinion?
Well, I think there are a couple of components to consider. I mean, if you look back history and where we are today with right, and how movies or television, this is scripted media. These are actors playing a role, and you have something that comes out and you watch it for a while and get entertained. You can't really interact with that media necessarily. And then you have various role-playing games, and you get to play, and the characters are interactive. They look 3D sometimes, but they don't look realistic. I think what you see now is a convergence of this, whereby you have the realism of the characters, right? But you also have the interactivity of a character that looks very real. And then your mind will visualize it, you'll interact with it, and then your mind psychologically can't discern between what is real and what is fake. And recently I met a person in Los Angeles, and he recreated the Martin Luther King Jr. Avatar, basically. It's a 3D, realistic-looking version of MLK, presented to schools. He had all the data points, and actually kids can go and interview Martin Luther King and have an interactive conversation, and he looks almost real. He looks real, actually. You can't tell that he's no longer with us. So that is where we've come now with artificial intelligence, the combination of the realism of character, whether the character is a real character or a fictitious character, but also having the ability to interact. And we see that also in various aspects of our lives today, whether it's Siri or Alexa. The interface is voice. It's not visual, right? But once you add the visual and you have the voice, well then psychologically you're watching or interacting with that content, and there's another dimension of realism that emerges from that. So I think that's where we're going, and then certainly with eventually with 3D robots. I mean, that's another dimension. It's not just the content that we see online, but rather if you have a robot that looks real, sounds real, and interacts like one of us, then who's not to say that that robot is not human, actually, right? So this is where we're going with this, I think.
I have one quick comment. Is that the real David Chen speaking?
That's a good question.
That is
It may not be me, actually.
But both of your feedbacks were so great. Both of your answers were so great. So I have actually 2 follow-up questions from both of your answers. It's such a fascinating topic. So first, David Meltzer, you made a really nice comment on how the voices and the presence of celebrity will become so important. Celebrities, C-level board members, and trusting the media in the future and now is just so crucial. And true deep fakes or social synthetic, they use powerful tools to manipulate the news, manipulate stories. So what if a C-suite executive gave an honest statement to his customers and then decides to claim that they were victim of a deep fake, because the customers didn't like it. So which stories would the customers believe? And trusting the content which we receive is so important. And nowadays we have more access to more information day by day than ever before. So some individuals have eroded trust, and institutions created these fake news. In your opinion, what is your opinion? How dangerous can these deep fakes be?
It's funny. I would analogize to a cotton ball, and I know that I use that ridiculous example to show people where we should point and direct our attention and our intention into. A cotton ball seems as if there would be no need to verify or regulate or have any harm at all. But if you start using your creative process and think about how you can use a cotton ball in order to harm people, you could probably think of a variety of different ways. The same thing holds true with AI and the variety of technologies that you're talking about. It flips the legal system completely upside down. The verification of an agreement, verbal, written, video, right? In any type of representation now has to be questioned and verified in some manner. I used to question, how could people not believe the Holocaust happened? How could the people, believe these fake news as it was happening? Well, you can tell because the technologies were as new to them that were being utilized for propaganda as they are being utilized today for us. It's just a different cotton ball. And so I think we have to take a more enlightened look at it and take a step back and say, let's study history and see how people have utilized verification, identification, and authenticity in order to effectuate communication that is real. And let us all understand that it is a learning curve, and we're just lucky to have super processing people and computers and technologies and companies, even like SAP, that literally can help assist us in accelerating that learning curve so that we can live as close to our potential of the truth as possible.
What a perfect answer. Does anyone have anything to add? Fantastic. Thank you, David Meltzer.
The issue of deepfakes is real. I'll give you a real example that happened to me just last week. So people try to connect with me all the time on LinkedIn. And one guy got hold of me, and he says he's this investor from Beijing. And I looked it up, and it seemed credible, so I accepted his invitation. But then he says, let's do a Skype call, and I want to talk about investing in one of your projects. So we get on the video, Skype, and I could tell it was a bit dubious because it was a video of that person going over and over again, but the voice didn't match the video. So that told me that the video was kind of running on a loop, circular loop, and then his accent clearly didn't match the profile of the guy that I saw on LinkedIn. So he was trying to deep fake me by showing this video that went over and over again and doing a voiceover and getting me to be interested in his project. And I'm sure it was some sort of a scam. So that's a very crude example of a deep fake. But I can imagine, where sometime soon that we'll have, a video that looks really realistic, and then somebody can also copy the accent of that real person when it's not that person. And then when we get there, the question is, how do you tell between what is real and what's not real? And once I think, wow, that guy's real, he really wants to put in money, and maybe it's an exchange of things, whatever, and people get scammed. I can see that happening very soon, actually. But now there are very crude mechanisms of people trying to do that already with the limited technologies. But I can see sometime very soon that we'll be duped. People will be duped, actually. So it's a matter of us enforcing that and finding ways to figure out what's real and what's not.
Yeah, absolutely. Now going to another topic, David Chen, you mentioned a magic word earlier, and I'm a very big believer in serving our next generation, in helping them thrive. I do a lot of my own social media, my own YouTubing in that field, and your word was education, and education for our next generation. So that just triggered another question just in my mind. How can we use synthetic media for social good? For example, climate change, education, or recently I also read the whole development for new possibilities in the whole field of healthcare. And with large amounts of real digital patient data, just a single hospital with adequate computer power would be able to create entirely imaginary populations of virtual patients. So do you see here deepfakes being an opportunity in the whole field for serving social good?
Well, one example that I can think of personally that I'm also working on is the creation of 3D worlds. I'm working with a developer group in Australia on this, and we're presenting this to a school district to use this 3D world to stream into people's homes so kids can learn better. Right now, all the kids are home. They're not going to school physically. They're on Zoom calls. They're bored. They don't show up for the Zoom call. They're skipping school, essentially. But what if we were to gamify it? What if we were to make that a game whereby they're in this 3D world, they've got their own avatar, the avatar looks real, right? And then they engage. And then there's also a learning component whereby they actually learn the content as well. So I also see a way for kids to interact with, let's say, a digitally created character, whether he's real or not, and having that interaction, having that kid experience that, let's say, in front of Martin Luther King or George Washington, pick your favorite character in history, and having that conversation. Imagine that interactive learning and how that learning would be different than just hearing a lecture from the teacher or from reading the books, right? So I think education itself will evolve, and with with this new digitally oriented technology, I see it as a much more interactive experience that we didn't have when we were growing up, right? So, and as you put on the VR goggles as well, I mean, you're right in front of the person, and you think you're right there in that particular moment in time. So I think the applications can be absolutely amazing. The question is whether we as technologists and developers have the right ethical view, the ethical boundaries to do something that's that's ethically correct with this technology versus something bad.
Very good point. And Arif Khan, do you have anything to add? The social good? Oh, we can't hear you at the moment.
You need some AI in there.
All these new digital technologies.
No, he's live.
Yeah. Okay, he's going to restart. So while he's restarting his AirPod.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Sometimes they go off and on. I don't know why. I think David's point is great because e-learning and education and preserving that hologram and images is a critical way of building engagement. My bias somewhat is to trying to discover the question, or I try and ask myself this question, which is, when have I been wrong? And the problem with what is fake news, what is misinformation, what is disinformation is usually tied fundamentally to my own filter bubbles and perceptions. And that's something that I have discovered as a human being that's consistent across all human beings. So about 3 to 4 years ago, for example, I fundamentally believed that a lot of UFO footage was completely incorrect and completely, it does not make sense. It's done by hobbyists, and those are fakes that exist. But 3 days ago, the Pentagon decides to release official UFO footage. That doesn't say that there are different civilizations or anything of that sort, but they release that footage anyway. It makes the news in the ABC News section. So I am asking myself as a human being, how am I wrong about my existing worldviews today? And what am I believing right now that is actually fake? Right? So, because I am the victim in many ways of or an agent in many ways of the information sphere that exists. And if I don't have the right mental models of discernment and filtering, or even technological tools like what David's pointing to, verification, then it's very difficult. But even if you verified stuff for me, and I still have my existing biases, that's where it gets really tricky. So David Chen is pointing to the uncanny valley effect, but also the ability to impart really powerful storytelling tools, which I think is important. But I'm struggling with the idea that how do we actually equip even myself but other people with mental models to deal with the information, the flows of information that tend to get so corrupted. And I look at the present situation of the pandemic and the way that the information shifted in narrative very quickly, from whether it's a pandemic to not, whether you should wear a mask or whether you should not. There's so many different narratives out there, some officially sanctioned, others not sanctioned. Sometimes you get truth from the front line, like I got a lot of truth from Twitter feeds of doctors, that I got from, let's say, official organizations. So where is that signal is going to be continuously a question. And my belief is that sometimes in the age of deep fakes and fake news, sometimes synthetic media can actually be used as a truth-telling tool. It's just who is the agent behind it. So that ethics is something that I don't see a universal adoption species presently. We're very much interested in the ethics of survival, and so that is a very different conversation.
Oh yes, but a very deep conversation, which is definitely, I think, up all of our alleys here. Everyone is nodding. Now I'm looking at the time. It is unfortunately time to close the panel, although we have so many more questions which came in also from the audience. Some fantastic topics still which are still to be discussed. And unfortunately we have to close this exciting panel. And with no further ado, it's back over to you.
Thank you so much, and I can only say on behalf of all the people listening in today, that was a very interesting conversation. It always is, but I think this one kind of topped one of the sessions that we have had together. We do have a couple of questions coming up here from the different participants, and I also want to mention before I go to the questions that David Meltzer has a very great training going on here on Friday. So there's a link in the chat that I will inspire people to take and sign up. And so one of the questions that is coming in here is that we speak about. And I also think it's very refreshing because we are very much living in this COVID world right now where everything has been turned upside down. So one question we have here, could we get a little bit of a timeline on here? We saw some glimpse, we saw something that has already happened, but can we get, for each of the incredible speakers here, can we give a little bit of a timeline when what you talk about actually becomes the new norm?
David Meltzer. Showtime.
I think it's just like COVID. It comes in stages. It will actually, the more that fake news and these deep fakes become normal, the more they'll have to be verified. And so as it stages out, the more aware people become of the voice and the video. Right now, the majority of our world knows about face tuning. That's about where they're at. But next they may know about voice duplication and all these different technologies. So as they evolve to what I call chasm, then will that awareness arise. But I think it's over a decade that we're going to have to deal with some really interesting and significant issues that are going to be apparent because of this technology.
Any other perspective on a timeline?
Nobody likes to talk about time.
I will say, yeah. Okay. So I will say, I think it's a very important conversation because just like David Chan gave an example, and it's probably only because he has the insight he has that he kind of knew that he was almost being tricked right there. So I think it is a very important conversation that everybody out there in society know how they can be tricked, but also how this maybe can also be something that can be used in a good way. So by this, I want to say one more time, big thanks to Charlotte, Dave, and Ashraf. I had the opportunity to meet Ashraf a number of times, so I'm a big fan of his mindset and everything that he does. So big thanks, and I know that we'll be back on next Thursday with one more exciting topic. As we know, it is all around the world after COVID from an AI perspective, and these incredible people are looking at this from many different kind of perspectives, so many more perspectives to come. And by this, I would like to put the attention on that it's only Thursday today, and even though it's May the 1st tomorrow, we have some incredible session lined up for tomorrow, so I'm just going to put the attention on that for 2 seconds. So let me just share here. Actually in parallel with this session that we were just running right now, we had a session going on, so I know you can't be yet at two sessions at the same time, but we did record it. So there was a session of the Future of Work Bootcamp with Global Startup Ecosystem, which is all around work from home and lifestyle. And tomorrow we have our session coming up that have also been running a number of times, which is the session around health and well-being, SAP Purpose to Work Life, where we have the here, which is more a meditation kind of session. And we are launching a new series tomorrow, which is called 1 Billion Lives. So SAP is driving a big initiative around 1 billion life, where we work with entrepreneurship, inside, outside SAP in collaboration with our big network of partners around the world. And this will be a series that will be running every Friday going forward for the next 5 months, where incredible ideas will be presented. And we will actually tomorrow unveil, we had a big contest going on around solution for COVID, and tomorrow we will have the winner presenting with us. So 1 Billion Lives series will be launched tomorrow. So 2 more sessions on SAP Purpose at Work Life before we go on weekends. So thanks again, and stay safe out there. There are much more positive things coming, which we all need. The world has started to open up a little bit, and this is what this platform is about. It's about sharing. It's about having a positive spirit when we go through this very historical moment in time. So thank you so much. Bye.
And if I may add, next Thursday, join us again next Thursday. We're going to have a phenomenal guest speaker, Joanna Martinez, and it will be just as exciting as this one. Thank you so much for joining and for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.